last several months without having much of anything.
I know you'll get it.
Which one were you going to?
I'm going to pull 10. Just talk
10.
about it. Dana, you got any items you want to pull?
Item C.
You ready?
No.
I can see myself.
Yes.
Good afternoon and welcome to the October public meeting of the Public Works Department. My mic is not on, or I'm just not close enough.
Not close.
Excuse me. I thought I talked loud enough. Good afternoon and welcome to the October meeting of the Public Works Department. And in attendance we have Councilmember Larson, Vice Chair Councilmember Burke, Councilmember Scipio, and myself, Councilmember McIntosh. We have an unusual number of consent items on the agenda today. Are there any that committee members would like pulled?
C5.
We have 2 votes for C5, and then I would like to have a brief chat about C10. Okay, could I have a motion to approve the balance, please?
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please place your votes. All right, that is unanimous. Clerk, if we could have the item C5 read to us, please.
Item C5, resolution authorizing permanent and temporary easement acquisitions for the Hawthorne Road structure replacement project by deed and condemnation $372,825, located in the Northwest Ward.
Mr. Huff, can you give us a briefing here, please?
Absolutely.
Or is there a specific question, or we just want a briefing?
A briefing would be ideal for
Councilor
me.
Larson, do you have a specific question?
Just interested, let's have the briefing
Great.
first.
Okay.
Thanks, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, this item is a acquisition of property in association with the Hawthorne Road culvert replacement. You have property owners on either side of the road, Atrium Health and a developer. And basically, you have infrastructure needs, a sewer line installation in association with that culvert replacement. And then there's an end section on the down gradient side of the culvert system that will require easement. So that's the purpose for the acquisition. The prices are high due to the area in question. So, that is the essence of the acquisition for infrastructure needs in association with the Hawthorne culvert replacement. So be happy to answer any questions.
Do you happen to have the picture of that culvert, so the public can see just what we're doing there?
How bad it is.
How bad it is particularly?
Oh, of the culvert itself, ma'am?
Yeah.
I
You
didn't
did
bring
bring
any
that.
pictures of the culvert, just the exhibit of
Okay.
the property acquisition.
I think it might be a good thing for the public to see what we're doing and how some of our infrastructure,
Yes.
the status and conditions of them, and that would be, if you could provide that at our next council meeting so they could see that, that would be great.
Councilor Larson, any specific questions?
Okay, I have a series of questions. I understand this is a state bridge that's being repaired. Is that what you said?
The Hawthorne Road culvert system is a city-maintained structure. In our previous conversation, we were talking about a state NCDOT bridge at another location. This particular project here is this piece of city-owned and maintained
This
infrastructure.
is ours, okay.
Yes, sir.
And so the land that we're acquiring, which is fairly extensive pieces of land, are we actually acquiring the land, or are we acquiring easements for construction?
It is both. It is temporary construction easement and it is permanent easement. The permanent easement is for the sanitary sewer system and an end wall that goes to abut or accompany the culvert system on the down gradient side.
Right.
But in addition to that, you have temporary construction easement as well.
Well, there's several operating businesses in this area, I think
Yes, sir.
particularly on the west side.
Yes, sir. And we are coordinating with the developer, and they have had several meetings with staff, And that's where we're talking with them about their development plans in association with the culvert replacement.
So do we know if there's demolition involved? Are we doing any demolition in this project?
We will demolish the existing culvert system and then replace the sewer lines and some peripheral storm drainage.
But none of the buildings that are being...
None of the buildings, it's our understanding that the developer intends to demolish the building at the corner of First and Hawthorne, though. That's our understanding.
Right, okay.
The old dance studio.
For dance
Correct.
studio?
The old
Yeah.
dance studio.
Dave Hillman of Quiet Pint owns that.
That's
Right,
it. He intends to develop the whole area, is our understanding. A parking lot on the up gradient side, and then a bridge to connect the dance studio building or former dance studio building with the Quiet Pint parking lot, is our understanding.
So the bridge will undergo construction. How long is Hawthorne going to be closed because of this?
Our intention is to keep at least one lane open on Hawthorne the entire time because of Atrium Health and the access for emergency services. So that plays a lot into the length of the project. The project could be 6 to 7 months, weather dependent, and based on unforeseen utilities that we might encounter. There's a duct bank in there, fiber, everything is in that corridor, unfortunately.
Right. Thank you.
Attorney
Yes, sir.
Carmen.
Yes, just for clarification, this item, I think, is going to be moved out of committee if committee desires it to move forward for Monday night. Is that correct? So, Councilmember Scipio, do you want staff to add the pictures to the agenda item?
That would be great.
Okay, and if it's approved by everybody, it'll be on the consent agenda, but the pictures will be added. Is that
Yes,
okay?
that'd be great.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Keith, how old is the culvert that we're replacing there?
So, Mr. Chairman, there's several formations there. You have the old bridge that was the old Hawthorne Curve Bridge for 40. There are still wooden piers underneath this structure that concrete has been poured around, and then several additions over the years. So to answer your question, it's piecemeal back from the 30s.
One of the joys of being a really old city.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Okay, could I get a motion on this, please?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. All right, the ayes have it. Let's now go to our general agenda, and we have several information items and a couple of resolutions. If we could have G1, please.
Item G1, information on 2023 leaf collection.
Everybody's favorite topic. This year's going to be better. Oh, I'm sorry. I pulled C10 as well. I'm sorry, Steve. We're going to do this other one first, okay?
Okay.
Won't take a minute. Thank you.
Item C10, resolution authorizing a contract change order with Stantec Consulting Services Incorporation for citywide engineering plan review services, $171,500.
I don't need a report on this. I just want to highlight the fact that outside consulting work is expensive. This is a 6-month contract for $171,500. So we can go hire contractors on the outside, but it cuts into how much work we can afford to do. So I just wanted to highlight that. So if I get a motion on it, please.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, motion and second. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Now on to leaf collection. Sorry about that, sir. Sorry about that, Steve.
Item G1, information on 2023 leaf collection.
Good afternoon, Chairman McIntosh and all the council members here today.
Good afternoon.
First of all, we're going to talk about our favorite subject, leaf collection. I want to update everyone on leaf collection for this year. And so I'm going to get started here. Just an overview. Leaf collection season normally starts the first week of November, but we now have the option to start earlier if leaves start to fall early. And the season runs through the middle of November, and or as long as it takes to make 3 rounds in each quarter. And hopefully, on a perfect world, that we won't have any inclement weather where we'll have ice, rain, or equipment damage to where it would cause us to be in later than the middle of January. Next, you'll see we have the leaf collection route maps. And as I say, we got 4 quadrants, and those 4 quadrants consisting of 28 routes. And within those 28 routes, we have about 90 different sub-routes that's going around the city. So it's quite a few routes to get in during leaf season. Next, I'm going to talk about the equipment and staff. First, we got the automated leaf trucks. This year, we're going to have 12 automated leaf trucks, and the staff needed to do this process. We need 12 drivers because it's a one-man operation. The driver, he goes down the street. Everything is operated from inside the truck, so you only need one person for that particular truck. Pull behind leaf trucks, and with the scour bed trucks that actually pull those trucks around. So we're going to have 24 pull behind leaf machines and 24 scour bed trucks. Staff needed 24 drivers, that's to drive the scour bed trucks, and 48 laborers. That way we have 2 laborers for each pull behind leaf machine.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Steve, can I stop you for a question, please? Councilmember Mundy.
Thank you, Steve. The original numbers, we have 12 of which are the machines, and then 24, but what did we have last year? What's the increase?
17, that's going to be on some slides to come.
Thank you.
All right, the primary goal for this year is providing leaf collection for single-family residents for the city of Winston-Salem, and we'll try to get through all the rounds as quickly as possible. And just a side note, leaf collection is not provided to businesses and apartments. Now we're going with the changes in the program. Okay, as we all said, like we have 4 quadrants, and every year we rotate in a clockwise direction around the city. Last year we started in 4. This year we're going to start in 1. But the change is we're going to start with 1 and 2 at the same time. That way we have 2 quadrants, that's half the city. We'll be in those 2 quadrants all at one time, which should speed up the process with the equipment we got. And like I said, hopefully we're going to have a good year to where we don't have any inclement weather to slow us down. So that process will help us out a lot. Okay, getting back to the increase in equipment, we had 17 pull-behinds last year in 2023. This year, we're starting out with the same amount, 17, but we added 7 more pull-behinds, which gave us a total of 24 total now. That's a 41% increase over last year. So that's really why we're able to do 2 quadrants at one time now. Same thing with the employees and actually the crews. Like I said, with the crews, we're going to increase another 7 crews, and it's going to be the same percentage increase of 41%. And that way, with the crews, we have 12 crews in quadrant 1. We're going to have 12 crews in quadrant 2. And along with those crews, we'll have those 12 automated machines will be picking up the heavy loads. Like the big piles, we'll have those going along beside the pull-behinds. Okay, to prevent equipment failure, when we have days where it's raining continuously all day long, the leaves get really, really wet. So those the automated machines, they get clogged up. It messes up the bearings and everything in the machine. So we decided this year to keep equipment failure. When we have days like that, we're going to pull those off the routes so they won't get tore up. Because once they tear up, it may take several days before we can get them back online. So I think it's a smart thing to do is just pull those off and just try to continue with the pull-behind machines. And I guess the question would be, what are we going to do with the staff that we have for the automators in days like that? What we'll do is take those same guys and we'll put them on brush to have them continuously working brush during leaf season. And some of the leaf collection guidelines, one of the most important ones is do not park vehicles on, in front, or near your leaves, because when the trucks come through, and if you got your cars or vehicles out in front of it, we can't get in there to get the leaves out, and then we start getting calls about you missed my collection, you didn't get it. If the cars and vehicles are out there in front of it, we can't get to it. So please do not put your vehicles in front of the leaves. Also, you need to rake the leaves to the edge of the yard, behind the curb, not in the street, because that's a major problem. We had a lot of calls last year where the citizens would call in and say, well, we got a traffic problem because the leaves in the street. First of all, the leaves are not supposed to be in the street, not supposed to put them out there. And then one of the most important things, too, is storm drains. Those leaves out there, they get on top of the storm drains, then you create a problem with flooding in the street and cause a lot of damage and accidents that way. And they don't want to put the leaves on a tarp, because if you put the leaves on a tarp, you bring them to the curb, and once the machines start sucking the leaves up, they might suck that tarp up in there and cause damage to the machines as well. And like we was talking about inclement weather, it may force a little delay in the collection. Hopefully we're gonna have that perfect weather this year, where we don't have any kind of bad weather before at least February anyway. And we don't want to burn leaves inside the city limits. Sticks, rocks, and other debris may damage the equipment. So we have to be careful on some of these guidelines here. Okay, that's the end of the presentation. Do you have any more questions?
Questions for Stevie? Councilmember Mundy.
Thank you, Stevie. You were at my most recent community meeting, so I know you know this information, but I want my citizens in Ardmore specifically to hear that I'm reminding you. Some of those yards in Ardmore just can't comply with this. You know, the yard is up over a raised wall. They don't have the space next to the sidewalk that many of the other neighborhoods do. So I just think we need to be sensitive to that in those neighborhoods where they can't comply, even if they wanted to, and make sure that we can service them as well. And I know you will do that. I know it's on your list of things to follow up. So I'm just making everybody else aware of that.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
Just to be clear, we have 12 automated leaf trucks. That requires one driver.
That's great.
We have 24 now. 24 three-man team trucks.
Yes,
So we have really 36 trucks out there picking up leaves.
that's correct.
That's an increase from last year significantly.
That's a significant increase. Like I said, with the number of vehicles, that's a 41% increase.
For both the single-man truck and the three-man trucks.
The increase was just on the pull behinds. The automators are still the same from last year. We had 12 last year.
12, same on that.
It's just a lot of times last year with the 12 automators, there were times where some of the automators were down. Sometimes it's four machines. We didn't have a full operating. Sometimes, you know, out of 12, you know, 4, that you down 25, you know, 25% of your fleet is only working. So it makes it very hard to pick up leads when you got 25% of your equipment working. So hopefully we're going to keep those machines up and running this year.
We had a perfect storm last year with a variety of problems with equipment, manpower, and weather.
Right, because last year we had, I think it was 19 days where we couldn't do anything because it was raining. We had a lot of rain last year.
Right.
So
well, I applaud your effort here, and I think good luck with it, but it looks like a major improvement.
Thank you.
Councilmember Scipio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Doolan, sometimes our residents aren't clear about where to put those leaves, and different streets are laid out differently. So one street, there may be grass going to the curb, a little strip of grass, then a sidewalk, then the person's property, but there may be a wall there. So it's about this much space from the curb to the property line. Are people to put their leaves on the sidewalk or try to put it in that little green grassy strip? But sometimes it means they will be in the street. So what's the best thing?
In a situation like this, it's better to put it right behind the curb, between the curb and the sidewalk, if it's large enough. That way it's not stopping people who want to walk down the sidewalk, and plus it's keeping it out of the street. But no, sometimes it's narrow that you don't have that much space, so it will probably be out in the street just a little, but try to maintain the area between the curb and the sidewalk.
But is it two no-nos? Do not put the leaves in the street.
That's
Do not
correct.
put the leaves on the sidewalk.
That's correct, because we get a bunch of calls now where say the leaves are blocking the sidewalk. And so sometimes it's hard. It's a gray area there where you only have just a little space to put them. But if you can, like I say, keep them out of the street and off the sidewalks if you can.
So if their yard is over here, can your equipment go over there from the
I think they can
trucks?
go, I think like 17 feet, somewhere along there. So they can get beyond the sidewalk if they have to.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Burke.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Doolin, for such a good presentation. And also, thank you for the changes that you all have made to make leaf collection more efficient in our city. I'm so happy to know about the increase when it comes to our crews and when it comes to our equipment. And when we met last week, we talked about making sure that our citizens are informed, because we're going to have to be a team and work together in order for this new plan that we have to really work as smoothly as possible. Can you talk about how we're going to inform our community?
Okay, Aaron and I, Assistant City Manager Aaron King, we talked about ways of putting it out there on the website for us where we plan on being from 1 week to the next. And we talked about doing that maybe once a week, like on a Thursday or a Friday. Like for the following week, we're going to be on X Street, Y Street, or wherever, and try to maintain a schedule like that so people know in advance when we're coming. That way they have the leads out. So we're going to try to do a lot of things with marketing and to social media, stuff like that.
I think that is great, and I also think that these guidelines that you just reviewed with us, if they can be posted as well, and that'll help to protect our equipment if those guidelines are posted, and it'll help to keep our citizens safe who want to take walks on the sidewalk. So thank you so much for all that you have done and for all that you do.
Thank you.
I want to echo Councilmember Burke's praise for the amount of research, amount of time, thought that has gone into making this year a better leaf collection season than last year. I know you guys have worked really hard on it, so I'm looking forward to a better experience for everybody, crews included, as well as the general public. I would ask council to use whatever social media platforms you frequent to push this out. I know I'm going to go to the YouTube of the meeting, and I'm going to document what time this discussion starts, post that on my Facebook page and wherever else people go so that people can hear the entire discussion. And then I think we need to follow that up. And just whenever there is something that comes out of our communications department, that we repost it and use our channels to amplify the message, because it takes cooperation. We can be as good as we can be and still have real problems because of the way citizens are interacting or not interacting with what we're doing. So thank you so much on that, and we look forward to updates as we go along.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. If we could have G2, please.
Item G2, information on City of Winston-Salem private street acceptance policy.
Mr. Fansler.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good
All
afternoon.
right, and members of the committee, hope you're doing well this afternoon. So the item before you is an update, or really some information about how the City of Winston-Salem handles our private street acceptance policy. Let me go full screen. Hopefully you all can see that well. And let me preface this by saying, as we go through our slide deck, that and a little bit of summary and background. So the Winston-Salem DOT and our field office has received requests of varying nature regarding how to handle public rights-of-way that have some condition or some level of street that is ultimately not on our maintenance schedule and not eligible for our Powell reimbursement state funds. And so there's a lot of nuance in that. We routinely receive requests on how to handle these scenarios. And according to our city ordinance 74-179, we do have a policy on this. It's very cumbersome that I'll show you in some previous slides to come, or excuse me, slides to come, about how the city currently handles these type of scenarios. And it really is intensive, requires a lot of engagement with the public, et cetera. So let's talk about that. What does Winston-Salem do? And thanks to Councilmember Mundy, who who asked us to kind of graph this. This has not been done before. We had an ordinance on this, but it has never been put into some graphics to kind of map out how we do this. And I think this is a good representation of kind of how we get to where we want to, or how we interpret, rather, our policy. So understand there's a lot of key indicators here, and the next slide summarizes those a little bit more efficiently. So let's go through some of those. Currently, the city of Winston-Salem, in order for a street to be maintained or be eligible for this process, is to be, of course, number one, within the city limits. It must have 30 feet of right-of-way, and then, of course, it has to have 10 feet of utility easement on both sides of the street for obvious utility requirements and infrastructure needs for the public rights-of-way. And then we ask that, per policy, that you submit a petition to the city. And the petition must be signed by 60% of the affected property owners, and not noted there is that those 60% also must represent 60% of the actual frontage. So sometimes you may have multiple lots, but if they have small frontage, that percentage may grow, because it does further say you need to occupy 60% of the frontage as well. Ultimately, there's a lot of back and forth on what an investigation from staff and understanding what requirements are needed to bring it into the current city standard. Or to meet the minimum thresholds that we want to accept. And there's where the staff intensity piece comes in. A lot of times that is where we have to go out, analyze not only the surface condition of the street, but the subsurface utility issues, stormwater issues, where we're trying to make sure that we're not inheriting issues that are going to cause that undue maintenance or that unforeseen maintenance burden that we have or that we don't want to inherit. Ultimately, it does come back before, through the Public Works and ultimately City Council for that final consideration, and there's the administrative task on the back end where we're negotiating that fee and then submitting the payment. That's how Winston-Salem currently operates that. A lot of steps and a lot of qualifiers to get eligible for this process. So in that, staff was asked to benchmark some peer cities, understanding that this is a lot that staff is trying to facilitate, and it's confusing for the end user oftentimes to understand all of the requirements. How do other cities do it? So we went out, and I'll just preface this by saying it is not consistent across the state. I'll say that, and you'll see that as we go through. It is very, and even within municipalities, there's inconsistencies when you talk to various folks, which make it challenging to track how this is handled across the state. Notice a few benchmarking peer cities that we did review that had ordinances that we could really, what we were said, we wanted to be backed up by actual ordinance that we could confirm, and that's where we have this list today. Let's talk about Durham. So currently, their process is the Public Works Director reviews the request, so they would submit a request and determine if the infrastructure just satisfies their applicable requirements. So there's infrastructure requirements similar to us or other municipalities where they have to review that to make sure it satisfies their parameters. After review, and they'll determine if yes or no it does that. And if it does, they'll recommend acceptance to City Council. And then only the City Council has the authority to accept that infrastructure for the city. So again, it has to go back through and be publicly accepted by City Council. Understanding there's specific kind of qualifiers there to make sure that these systems are, one, in good standing, and two, in the rights of way before they accept those streets, the water, sanitary sewer, storm draining, et cetera. Lenore is another one that had policy on this, and they also have to formal written request. It could be by resident or property owner of the said street, and they submit it to the Director of Public Works. Again, there's a review cycle on this, and they have to do varying, not always the same requirements, but some level of their requirements they had to meet. Again, it has to go ultimately through a recommendation of the City Manager's Office to City Council, and then, of course, they can approve or deny that, and they have some accounting metrics that they have to in that approval or denial. Mooresville, similar to us, must be in the Mooresville town limits, but then it must be on an adopted plan. So this must be something that is recognized as public good on a plan before it will be considered. They also must determine if there's any physical or topographical changes. This is where they have their engineering staff look at that to make sure that this is going to be beneficial and constructible, and that we want to maintain this if we want to take on this improvement. And then there's a negotiation of cost sharing, and it was unclear on how that was. It seemed to be on more case by case depending on the type of infrastructure needed to get it to their standard. Greensboro, and this is where it kind of got interesting as well, because they kind of have on their ordinance is really depending on does it satisfy a public need. And they gave the nuance, and talked to a few of those folks in Greensboro, and they gave the qualifier or kind of example of connections between two existing public streets, and does this connection between them serve a public good as a thoroughfare or a connectivity, some type of mobility, metric to connect the two public infrastructures. And so in that case, they would then execute an agreement because they recognize it as a public good for the community. And so if that kind of overarching guideline was met, then they would go through a different scenario where they had to execute this agreement, which basically said, we'll pay the street because we want to be able to use it, but all the other, and you see the list there, major maintenance elements are going to be on the landowner, because a lot of times these weren't even in public rights of way, but these were some agreement where we could, we being the city, the grantee, could operate that street. But it was really all tailored into that, how they structured that agreement, depending on how it fit into that scenario. But again, it was really to solve that public need connecting infrastructure on maybe either adjacent side. Let's talk a little bit about Charlotte. And Charlotte, this is straight from their ordinance. They did not accept for maintenance or lay out, open, or improve any of these streets, or laying any water mains or any sewer connections, et cetera, except for it be accepted or open as legal status of public street, or, it could have been I'm trying to read here, street corresponds as local location lines, unless such street corresponds in its location and lines, a street shown on a subdivision plat. So the key takeaway there, Mr. Chairman, is that it really has to be shown, again, on a subdivision plat as approved by the Planning Commission, or ultimately it does, number 3 there, it could be accepted as a public street. It did give the city manager that authority as well, should that be a request that he or she would take on. So Charlotte kind of all-inclusive or not inclusive pretty much for them. Chapel Hill, kind of similar to what we've seen, for them, it was really the policy of the town really had to have, and this is really the nuance is, to be eligible for them, it had to be one, agreement and petition, and then a 50% cost share based on the pro rata share of frontage. So in other words, the petitioner could reach out and request this, the improvements, but it had to be, again, another investigation and a cost share negotiation with that neighborhood. And then there's a lot of back and forth on Chapel Hill of how this was administered. I talked to 2 folks within Chapel Hill, and administering this seemed to be the challenge because of the pro rata share. And there was an equity piece there. I only have a little bit of frontage there. My neighbor has a lot of frontage there. And then we had a qualifier of, okay, 50%, you guys divide it up. And that seemed to be a sticking point oftentimes of understanding how that cost sharing breakdown was administered. So just some of the takeaways from how they were doing it. That's a lot of benchmarking peer cities, but some of the key takeaways and the discussion points really revolve around these few things here. Really inconsistent processes, and I mentioned that there's a lot of nuance and takeaways from the different municipalities, but in that, even administering this seemed to have inconsistencies. So there was some case studies across the board, across the state for these other municipalities where it was handled this way for a subdivision, or was handled for this way if it was maybe a voluntary annexation, or et cetera. There was just some of the inconsistencies there. And there was also heavy reliance, as you heard me mention a few times, a heavy reliance on staff assessments. A lot of times staff would be asked to go out and verify yes or no, and here's why, and then have the petitioner or the requester understand that. And why is this? I inherited this, or I just moved here type scenario. And then there's just unclear division between what's a public resource. We talked about Greensboro and how that qualifier of what's a public good, and then the additional maintenance. So here's where the piece was, do we want to accept that? Or do we want to go through this process and then add this to our maintenance schedule? What is that delineation between, is this really public good, or does that outweigh the maintenance that it would require in perpetuity? Of course, there was back and forth on the cost sharing negotiations, and a lot of folks had that, as I mentioned, some of those equity concerns of how much is too much, and if I own just a little bit, do I just have that share? Or maybe that's some of the most, stringent improvements are on my frontage. How does that factor into it? And there was various concern about what was annexed and what was the expectations of annexation, various infrastructure elements, aging equipment, aging facility structures, et cetera. How do we handle that? And to what level do we cap that? And is it acceptable? Property impacts was another one. Some folks wanted to be a part of this, they didn't fully understand the property impacts to get it up to current standard, and having that conversation and explaining that was often a challenge for other municipalities. And then there was back and forth on what development requirements for new streets, and how does that play into, okay, if it was, for example, maybe there was some examples of 08, 09 where development was started and then it didn't get fully finished, and streets were left partially complete. And what does that factor into it? And then lastly, POW bill eligibility, right? That's what ultimately, we want streets that are eligible for POW state fund reimbursement. And this is where we want to get those, and there's minimum standards that it has to be brought to, at least for that. 16 feet wide, you have to have certain capacity, and those type of metrics have to be applied, so that way these streets can ultimately be added to our POW schedule for final reimbursement, and which is where we want to be if we want to take over these maintenance or take over these streets. So that's a lot of information about peer cities and a lot of how we do it, and some of the key takeaways and the discussion topics that I wanted to highlight. So I'll pause there and ask any questions that I may be able to answer.
Committee or council members? Councilmember Mundy?
You want the committee to go?
Yeah, let's look at Councilmember Scipio.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fansler, how many streets do we have in the city that we are currently maintaining?
There's over 1,100 centerline miles. Now, how many streets? I'd have to reserve the right to follow up on that.
And the other question is, how many do we keep track of how many streets are not being maintained by the city and may likely come to us and want to be part of our street maintenance?
So there are several that are in that we are aware of that have been requested for public maintenance. There's also a number of that we keep track of that are private streets, and so there's a whole lot of streets in the city that aren't publicly maintained. So the answer to your question is yes, and we routinely get these, and sometimes we've vetted those and they didn't qualify, they didn't go through, they didn't qualify, and they come off our list because they just didn't meet the qualifications.
Currently, all private streets are maintained by the persons on that street or people who own the property.
Could be an HOA, it could be some type of agreement with the community, but essentially it's the property owners.
Or not maintained.
Yeah,
Or deferred.
okay, thank you.
Councilmember Mundy, we'll come back around this way.
Couple of questions for you. Help me and others understand the 10-foot easement. Does that mean that the homeowner can't put things on that 10 feet, or does it mean that at some point in time that 10 feet could be taken away from their property?
So that's minimum qualifications where we want to see that 10-foot easement before it would be eligible to take on as a public street. So that 10-foot easement is there for often dry utilities, fiber, internet, that type of things. And it's there, we would want to see that platted and on the in the plat in order for it to be eligible to be taken over.
But they can still plant on it, they can put
Sure.
ornamental shrubs, what have you, okay. The second question is, how does one know when they're buying a home that the street is not maintained by the city?
How does one know if the street is not maintained by the city? That's difficult for the homeowner. We certainly publish that information through our POW report. Essentially, there's some homework that we would defer to the property owner buying that, but that information is publicly known, and we can provide that should it be requested.
So it could be a caveat emptor, but is it in disclosure statements? I'm looking at Mr. Chairman as a real estate agent, is it in disclosures?
I'm fairly certain it is an item on them.
It is an item.
It's been a while since I've looked at one, but I'm pretty sure that
Okay.
that
So-
is an item.
If it's not, 9 times out of 10, your deed will refer to a plat, and on a plat, it will say public, private, and so forth. And the answer to your earlier question about the easement, you have to be careful in terms of what you put in the easement because you don't want to disturb the utilities underneath. So there are some limitations in terms of use of the easement.
Councilmember Mundy, to your point, and to echo what Angela mentioned, so now that we're in modern times, anybody who's buying a home now, their plat, there would be a recorded plat, and that plat would say, whatever street in parentheses, private street. And now the way our platting standards are, when you go out to look at that lot to buy that house, now we require you to have, basically everything in but the last inch of asphalt, curb and gutter, and street signs. So there's going to be black and white street signs in that neighborhood the first time you go out to look at that house that say, they're not the green and white, they're the black and white private signs.
I think the citizen just has to do a lot of homework to know what they are and are not buying.
I'll get back to you, and I'll just pull up the property disclosure. Let me read it while we're asking questions. Councilmember Larson.
Does the 10-foot right-of-way include a sidewalk easement?
So to be clear, it's 30 foot of public right-of-way with a 10-foot utility easement. So oftentimes the request that we're getting, Councilmember Larson, that is not the case. There's no sidewalk or any type of easement dedicated for that.
So if we
Specifically as far as an access pedestrian, anything like
we
that.
don't have the option of putting in sidewalks on these private streets, if we assume responsibility for them.
If we added them to our system and they became public streets, should council decide to do so, then that could be done, but they would have to be added to our system first.
Right.
Yeah. Second question, are we approving site plans at all now that include private streets for subdivisions?
Councilman Larson, that is an option, yes. The private streets are still reviewed and approved through the site plan process.
And if we have public utilities, sewer lines, electrical lines, whatever, in those streets, we still don't have, they're still not considered public streets, still private streets with public utilities in them.
And there's often an element of public utility easement, if that's the case, where there would be a private street with an easement for that public maintenance of that public utility.
Could somebody explain to me why a subdivision would not have public streets?
Because they want to have a gate. And so that's the number one reason, Councilmember Larson, if you wanted to gate at a community, you would have to have private streets. But number two, it allows for some more flexibility. So I'll give a little backup running start on this. We used to have a lot of issues on council with folks having private streets, and they would call their council members. This is going back to the mid-ish 2000s. They would call their council member and say, hey, take this street over. Staff would go through the process Jeff outlined and go look, and we would have no idea what construction standard it was built to. It could have been built in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And the delta for that person to get those streets up to the current city standards was unachievable. And so in 2006-ish or 7-ish, the city council adopted new standards and said, basically, you can build private streets, but you build them to our public street construction standard. We will give you a little bit of flexibility on horizontal and vertical curvature on those road design standards, but at least if you show up 10, 12, 15 years down the road, we know that you have built those private streets to our public street standards, so the delta is a much smaller delta. The other thing that it allows you is if you have a unique situation, like if you're familiar with the Chatham Park development on the north side of Robin Hood, where there was an existing private street out there, the developer wanted to maintain some of the character of the neighborhood and not mow down a swath of trees and preserve some of that. We worked with them to build in some flexibility on those private street standards in that situation. So those are some of the scenarios when folks would still utilize private streets as opposed to public streets.
Councilmember Burke. Nothing? Okay. Item number 30 on the North Carolina residential property disclosure asks whether the property abuts or adjoins any private roads or streets. So that is a requirement of any, it's a requirement of any contract. If you don't have this as a contract in your contract, it's not enforceable. So almost virtually everybody who does property dealings signs that.
So it's disclosed, they just have to look for it.
Right. Yes. Councilmember Scipio.
Just next steps on this particular topic. Mr. Fancer, are we putting together a private street policy and process?
So I'll step in. I see Jeff smiling over there. I'll step in a little bit on that, Councilmember Scipio. So this issue has come up in several wards, and what we agreed to do is we need to bring an information item to this committee to at least daylight the issue and get some direction. I will tell you that staff has kind of maintained an informal moratorium on this because we don't have, as Jeff alluded to, it's very staff intensive, and we do not have the staff resources right now to go out and handle these requests, let alone I think there's a policy decision of we already have challenges maintaining our public infrastructure that we're on the hook for. Do we want to add to that with no other resources coming in? So we wanted to bring this item to the committee to kind of get some direction, but we've kind of been holding off on bringing these requests through because we frankly don't have the ability to run them through. And then we're also in a kind of a bad shape right now for all the things that Keith mentioned to you and the emergency closures. We keep battling to keep adding new streets to our inventory. So I guess we just wanted to get that on the table for the committee and get some direction from there.
So does that then mean that at this time, if one petitions for a private street to be taken over by the city, we're just putting it on the back burner?
That is correct.
So we actually have a moratorium at this point on private streets switching over?
I'm looking at Angela. I don't know if that's the correct term, if that's the best way to do it, but we just simply haven't. Even if we wanted to do it, we just don't have the ability to go out and do it right now.
Yeah, I would say it's a staff-imposed delay process.
And to be clear, for the last 17 years or so, we really haven't added any new private streets that have not been looked at or by us. I mean, we're not annexing new swaths of city or county into the city limits. So a lot of that has been litigated. Maybe not all of it, but a lot of it has been litigated, or people have had the opportunity to bring it forward over the years.
I think that's correct. Councilmember McIntosh, I can't think of a ton. I know we did Tatton Park over off Jonestown, and there's probably been some others that came through, but that's been a while since we've brought those in.
So developers know up front as they're coming in to subdivide property, here's the rules.
That's correct.
So we don't have to go back and say, no, we can't take that over because it was shoddy work, or it doesn't meet our standards, and therefore, for us to maintain it, we've got to spend a bunch of money because somebody else did not do a proper job.
That is correct.
Proper or up to our
Mr. Chairman?
standards. Yes.
I'm wondering if it would be appropriate for the council to give an official moratorium on assuming private streets that allows staff the protection to not have to even go out and look at them.
I think the amount of effort to do that would negate any benefit we would receive by it. I mean, I think we have been in that mode now for some time. I don't know what we would benefit by that.
What's the official policy of the city?
I think if
Staff is not entertaining those requests. I don't know if
It's a staff-delayed,
It's a resource-driven.
process.
What-
I don't
what
think
does-
you need to take formal action to enact a moratorium, so to speak. I mean, just like with most things, it's a matter of what staff capacity and what they can get to, and having to prioritize things right now.
And if a citizen is not happy with staff's decision, they'll come to a council member.
Right.
That's the relief valve.
Which is what they do.
And it's up to, it's one of the reasons why we have these information sessions, so that we can internalize what the situation is and what our capabilities are, and take that request from a citizen and at least try to educate them as to why staff said what they said.
But would it behoove us to work on a policy that the staff would appreciate having in place? Even though we can't implement it, we do have a policy and a process.
We would take them away from work that they're not staffed to complete now in order to come up with that policy. We would set them further back. I mean, I don't think these requests come hot and heavy. We don't see these to some
they kind of come in fits and starts.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to predict. What I would say, Chair McIntosh and committee members, is if we're okay having kind of an informal affirmation of what staff has been doing over the past 12 to 24 months, we can keep that in place. And when we get to a better place on the staffing side, where we feel like we have some capacity to entertain these requests, then I think it's appropriate to start considering what that new policy looks like. Should we gear up to start handling these requests?
Is there currently a backlog of requests? Do we have requests out there right now that are being pending?
So I think there are some folks that are interested in having their streets added to the city's list. Again, we have not fully evaluated those because we don't have the staff capacity to go out and complete the evaluation. So, yes, there are folks out there that are interested in pursuing this policy.
Councilmember Mundy.
I agree that until we have enough staff to put together a policy, we can put that on hold. But one of the things what I really want us to look at, or for staff to look at, is who gets first priority. There is a list. Is it first come, first served? Is it the greatest need? And I'm not asking you to answer the question, but we need to be able to prioritize the requests in some, a fair way to the citizens.
That's fair, and that's a fair point, Councilmember Mundy. I will tell you, there's a couple different buckets of these. There's the bucket of folks whose roads were designed, developed, built, platted, and installed from day one as private streets, and that are still private streets. Bucket 2 is, and we have a little bit of this in the outlying areas we annexed in 2006, streets that were designed, built, and designated as public streets when they were in the county's jurisdiction, but never added to NCDOT's maintenance schedule, so we didn't add them. Those streets are out there today with green and white signs, and they look public. So for that person buying a home in that neighborhood, they think they're on a public street. Snow time comes, they call Division 9 office, and Division 9 says, well, we're not plowing your street. That's a little bit of a different can of worms in my book, because somebody who is out there thinking they have a public piece of infrastructure does not. So those are some of the things if we get to that point, we can figure out how to prioritize, because those are a little bit of two different buckets there.
Thank you.
Okay, this is an information item? All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Franzler.
Thank you. I'm not going far.
On the next one.
Item G3, please.
Item G3, resolution adopting the Winston-Salem Transit Authority bus service standards, guidelines, and procedures.
Thank you, Mr.
Franzler, are you presenting this one as well?
I will do my best. We'll recognize our general manager, Ms. Donna Woodson, as well, just in case there's questions that maybe I cannot answer. So, and Mr. Chairman, this is an action item that we're requesting today, really regarding the WISTA service standards and guidelines. So I'll remind this body that in 2020, the city contracted with HGR to really do a deep dive into our transit system. From that came a few things, and you'll see both of those today. Number one is the service standards and guidelines. Am I sharing? Oh. Can everyone see now? I apologize.
We're not on our screens yet. Nope, still
Anyway.
We don't have it on our screens.
There we go.
Here we go.
All good. Very good.
Voila.
So what are service standards? Service standards really are performance goals that are set by a transit agency that really define where service is high, kind of low, or maybe just meeting the average performance standards. And so really what we're here today to discuss is an initiative that seeks to do really three things: really improve the service quality, deliver more value for every dollar invested into transit, and lastly, identify opportunity for the city to innovate really and to really kind of reassess how we administer these public transportation services. And so for our agenda today, let me go to my next slide, really is developing and optimizing transit service. What are the service performance indicators? And then we'll talk a little bit about our next steps. But keep in mind, this idea of service standards is really to assess our current system and then how to make those improvements and to be more routine and more with some set guidelines on how these are handled. And so from that, and this is part of our like I said, our HGR study, this is really the nuts and bolts of where this process lives. So during the study, we have been working to develop a process really that raises the bar for transit in Winston-Salem. This is the roadmap that I wanted to highlight that really gets us to that point. I'll go through these real briefly. It really starts with the data gathering kind of section there, where whether from a customer or maybe a bus operator, even from a service request, hey, I need a stop or service along this route or whatever. Those are, how do we get that data coming in? Then it goes to the concept development, where we're creating these proposals based on the data that could improve the service for residents, it could carry more passengers, et cetera. Then there's an internal validation piece. really confirming within the city that the protocols we wish to take to the public. So there's that validation, really, of this is where maybe Donna and maybe city DOT leadership really want to assess that request as we got some of those preliminary concepts to make sure that we want to endorse this. Then we'll start to share that via the outreach section there to the public and get some of that feedback. This is oftentimes where we get some of the most critical input is when we roll this out to maybe the ultimate user when we're putting this out there. So that there's an outreach piece to this from that you go to concept adjustment, where you would take that feedback ultimately paired with what staff would comment on, how the public would interpret and receive that. And then we would adjust that recommendation or maybe that route change to fit that. Then there's an internal approval, making sure that that can actually be facilitated, that there's infrastructure that is in place to handle that change, et cetera. Ultimately, we would move to that implementation where we would be rolling out this service adjustment for a new service. We would be printing the schedules, making those online service adjustments, whatever the metric would, or whatever the need would be to actually roll this out. And then I want to call your attention to the performance tracker, really this feedback loop and how we start this process all over again. So our service indicators identify these high, as I mentioned, the high or the average or the low performing services. And the indicators require that we study low performers to recycle those hours. So let's pause and talk about what that means. And the whole idea here, and noted by the slide, is the goal is to create a virtuous cycle, right? Because if you're assessing these based on request and by your transit planning staff is looking at your lower performing routes, and you're making these improvements to those changes, you're internally vetting those, you're rolling them out for public comment, and you figure out a way to improve those through your implementation cycle, you're ultimately going to be implementing those and then creating this virtuous cycle where now that's no longer your lower performing routes. Maybe the next one up is your lower performing routes. And then you do the same process, or you start over again to assess those lower performing routes so they can continue along this same kind of cycle here. The whole idea there is to continuously improve our system. And this is the metric that staff feels, one, can be performed with the current infrastructure we have, can be vetted routinely based on the amount of requests we get and the type of requests that we get, and ultimately has the ability to be sustainable based on this virtuous cycle over time. All those things, we think that this process here would be a good way to handle these type of service requests as they come in. Let's talk a little bit about these service performance indicators. So there are four measures that really measure three things. So those four measures are highlighted there in your vertical columns: unlinked passenger trips per vehicle revenue hour, the fare box recovery, the operating cost, and then, of course, the unlinked passenger trips per vehicle mile. But those four measures really are highlighting three main things, and those are service effectiveness, cost effectiveness, and cost efficiency. Service effectiveness, number one, this tells us how many riders we can carry per hour or mile. Cost effectiveness really measures and tells us about how much costs each individual passenger trip per each route. And then lastly, the cost efficiency measures, they tell us about how much it costs for each hour the bus is in operation. So notice that, and one that I thought was interesting, each of those four measures kind of break down pretty, and you see where we drew the dark blue lines across to indicate which ones are low, which ones are kind of the average, and which ones are the higher performing routes. And they all line up kind of in those blocks where they're all qualifying within those four measures. And that was a good, clean delineation of how we're breaking this down. But this is the tool that we would use in this type of report allows us to understand which are the lower performing routes that we can apply that cycle to as our transit staff, often cross-referencing that with the requests that come in to where we can start analyzing and where we can make those recommendations for service improvements. So all that to being said, these measures are how we link and how we understand how our system is operating. So let's talk a little bit about next steps. And so, as I mentioned, the whole goal here is to be able to have guidelines in place where staff can take the request, apply the methodology, and make recommendations that are sustainable. And of course, there's an issue, as you've heard many times before, of making sure that we have the labor capacity to return some of those services. I highlight here the evening service. I mentioned, and you may or may not be aware, we had a public engagement session a few months ago, and where we were talking about some service changes, and one of the things that was profoundly relayed to staff, and I know to Donna and her team, was, okay, what about evening service? And I think that's part of the things that we're also looking to, and it's next steps for service in Winston-Salem for our transit system, is to take a hard look at that. And then, of course, propose a revised bus route changes in response to public comment. So that's plays right into what we're asking today, and what we're showing today is how do we revise these changes to accommodate those requests. And then lastly, you'll see there, as a key work item for not only our department, but I think really the public works section of the city, is to really prepare an RFP to solicit our next operating contractor. This is a big deal for our department as we embark on maybe some overhaul and some changes to how we administer our transit contract. And so this is a next key window of work that our staff will be embarking on to issue an RFP for our next transit provider as our current contract sunsets in 2024. So I'll pause there. And I'm happy to take any questions about this. This is an action item, Mr. Chairman, and again, just to adopt this policy that allows staff to vet these as a set guideline.
Jeff, can you go back a page and read the last line?
Here?
Yeah.
Microtransit.
Say again?
Read the last line of that.
Prepare an RFP to solicit a new operating contractor with option to pursue a microtransit pilot. You don't want me to gloss over the microtransit piece?
Well, I just want to put emphasis on that because I know
Fair.
there's been a lot of interest in the community. There's a lot of interest on the staff level. It's a difficult one to think about replacing our entire system with that.
That's right.
But there are some really good options and some really good thought around how we work that in.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, make another comment about that, because thank you for highlighting that. And one of the things to note is this is an element where staff thinks, through our work with HGR, where maybe it doesn't replace service, right, but it is a way to maybe fill in some gaps, especially on some lower performing routes where we have a high cost per rider. It doesn't make a lot of sense to keep running a fixed route where the sustainability reasons and just the cost per passenger is just not there. So we can look at this microtransit pilot to kind of help offset some of that cost. If we're running, $30 a passenger or $30 an hour for some of our services, and then we can change that to a much lower threshold for a point-to-point microtransit solution, that may be a better fit for some of those lower performing routes. So that's an option we're considering as we move forward. So I appreciate you highlighting that.
Thank you. Questions? Councilmember Larson?
Could you elaborate on the term microtransit a little bit?
Sure.
What that means?
Thank you, Councilmember Larson. So microtransit really is an on-demand transit service to allow for public transportation. It is typically done through, I don't want to say ride share, but it's really a point-to-point, on-demand, often mobile or online, intelligent-based transit service.
Think Uber. Think public Uber.
Public Uber. It's often subsidized and et cetera. It's really facilitated as an on-demand service.
It's not scooters.
Isn't that what we did during COVID for some of the passengers to get to work? They didn't take our bus, but they took some alternate transportation that we paid for.
Donna may have to help me with that. I'm getting a nod from the back, but
Councilmember Mundy.
Is that somewhat like TransAid?
so why don't I invite our general manager, Donna Woodson, to talk a little bit about that, just so we get it right.
And so we all keep looking back to her for answers anyway.
And then part of that question is, if we were moving to microtransit, would that in fact mean smaller vehicles? I would assume so, but I don't want to make an assumption that's not right.
Your assumption is correct. Good afternoon, Councilmember McIntosh and the members of the City Council. Yes, that would be smaller vehicles, and it would, as Jeff stated, be a type of service that would be on demand. So it would provide an access for our citizens to call in the same day. Right now, we do not take same-day reservations on TransAid. So this would allow them the option to take same-day transit, and it would cover areas that the fixed route is really low performing or that's outside of our area, and it would provide that extra service. In addition to that, it would also offer opportunity for us to invite or meet requirements as it relates to DBE, which is Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, because multiple companies that offer that service are DBE or MWBE certified. So that service area will be covered by those in smaller vehicles, and that would allow people to call in the same day. 2 hours is generally the time frame, and then they would get dispatched transportation to those quadrants. So it would be a service area that they would have to potentially meet. So, it wouldn't be just, I'm at this bus stop, I'm at that bus stop. It would be an area that's identified, a zone or something of that nature that would have to be in order to get that service.
One more question, I'm sorry. I don't know if this is correct or not, but I was told at one point that federal funding was available for the larger buses and not so much for smaller vehicles. Are there federal grants that could help pay for this switchover?
Yes, there are pilot programs that are federally funded.
Thank you.
For this type of service.
Anyone else? I will say that we met with one of the largest providers of scaled microtransit services, a company called Via, and they've done a successful program in Wilson, North Carolina, and a successful program in Arlington, Texas. Neither of those environments reflect or are similar to what we have. So it was a great presentation. It was lots of light bulbs went off, but their service, we cannot effectively use their service for our entire city. So we're looking to pick up what points we can out of their service and adapt it to what we already have and what works for us.
That's correct.
Both of those cities they're just different than Winston-Salem from their layouts, et cetera. So we're trying to use the best elements of multiple different plans.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. If nothing else, and this was not an action item, correct?
Yeah, it is.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
Could I get a motion, please?
I'm just confused on what's the action we're going to try to take here?
Passage of the resolution that's attached
Okay.
for G3. Basically approves the service standards and guidelines which are attached to the item. Is that what staff's pretty much asking?
That's correct, and this is an action to approve the service, and the presentation just highlights that larger document, but it is a resolution to approve what we summarized today.
Move for approval.
Second?
There we go. Okay. If I could get a vote, please. I see Mr. Clark in the audience. He has expected our Public Works meeting to go as briskly as it usually does, but. Thank you. That is unanimous, although I didn't get an opportunity to vote. Everybody in agreement on that? Okay, great. Thanks. That brings us to G4.
Item G4, resolution adopting the Winston-Salem Transit Authority bus service amenity standards and guidelines.
Mr. Fansler, since you're up.
You guys are going to be sick of me. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll share my screen here, full screen. So similar to the bus service standards, we wanted to bring this item as well. This is the service amenity standards. What are the bus service amenities, right? That's the bus shelters, the trash receptacles, the benches, those type of public rights-of-way amenities that accommodate really the stops that have been designated on our route system. So along with the service standards, we also wanted to look at how we handle the requests for service amenity standards, because these routinely come in a number of different fashions for, hey, I want a new shelter here, I think I need another trash can there, or maybe they just want they just come in many different shapes and sizes. And we, as staff, didn't have a great process for, okay, how do we apply them? Okay, what are we doing there? Do we think there needs to be another trash can there, or what type of service are we wanting to get from those? So from that, we engaged HDR again to help us put some metrics on that to better understand what that looks like. And so for today's agenda, really wanted to talk about how we come about classifying these stops into tiers. We wanted to have a tiered, data-driven system that basically says we want to prioritize where the riders are and make our recommendations based on where they will get the most benefit based on the amount of folks using that particular stop. And so we've analyzed all the stops in our system. And I will say that all those stops are classified within those four. And as I switch slides here, you'll see those four tiers here. I say four, we call it base, level 1, 2, and 3. But notice there, really it depends on the daily boardings. How many folks are boarding the bus from that stop? Here's really the key feature of what we're trying to highlight today. And basically, daily boardings for the base level, anything really below none or to up to 10 kind of daily boardings is those base, so these are the ones where you're basically going to show up and you're going to see a bus stop sign today. Ultimately, we'd like to have a place that meets ADA requirements. So long term, we want to get to a position where we would also have some type of ADA accommodation via some type of concrete pad, so we can have access on and off the bus. That is a base level stop. Moving up, you can see daily boardings less than 10 to 19, so less than 20. That level 1 category where we add a few more of those. And notice as we go through there, the amenities are going to be trying to really targeted to the amount of folks at the stop and are using the type of the things. And so what I'm trying to say is we've categorized like the trash bin, the lighting, the seating as a higher something that would be more beneficial for more people. So we want to include those all the way down as to a level 1. So notice that as level 1. You see, we also then include, we want to look for, is there any shade tree accommodations, or how are we having that? Does that, how's that qualified? Or maybe a service, like a stop adjustment to, if we can find some type of shade for those. Lighting, seating, those type of things are going to be at level 1. Level 2, as we move into that 20 to 39 category for daily boardings, you see, we start to include things like bollards or some additional landscaping or bike racks. And depending on what can fit within the right-of-way constraints that we have, not all of that is going to be doable or feasible, but as a base, these are going to be the type of things that we want to see for these type of level 2 stops. Of course, there's the engineering element to make sure that and the economic element that they can be, 1, funded, and 2, actually built within the confine of where the stop is. And then the enhanced shelter, that full-blown, what we're calling level 3, 40 plus, and we do have a few of these stops around the city where we were ultimately going to be doing all of the above and then adding in the larger shelters, and then moving to that fully enclosed. And some of these, and we have a couple locations where it would 40 plus, maybe even 80, where we'd be looking at double shelters just to accommodate the need. And ultimately, maybe some power features in there where ultimate, emergency call buttons or maybe Wi-Fi or something long-term for some of those higher, really targeted performing stop locations would have those type of full amenities. So really classifying, and this is the key takeaway, classifying this based on the tiers of ridership daily boardings to roll out these type of amenities. Switching gears, let's talk about the requests that also come in about, hey, what about adding a stop? All right, if I got this amenity at a stop, but maybe I want to add a stop here at this location. And this flow chart really is a guidebook to help staff. This is one of the routine requests that we get is, hey, I need a stop here. I need you to add this to your system, or hey, I need you to move this stop, right? It's an existing stop, but we've had this request in the last month where I want you to move this, 500 feet away for whatever reason. And again, we did not have a great guidebook on how to handle that. And these requests come in routinely across all of our routes. So what you see here is really a flow chart to help staff navigate those type of requests. And there's some key metrics. It looks at, where the stop spacing is. Is it, greater or less than the required spacing for our services? And then we want to look at the distance between the existing stops and making sure that here's the whole deal. We don't want to add a stop for one rider and delay 40 other passengers. So this whole metric here is a tool to allow staff to vet that based on the stopping distance by introducing additional stops or altering existing stops, how that plays into the larger route structure. And by doing that, we can make some informed decisions on yes, that qualifies, or no, that doesn't qualify. So this metric allows us to understand where we can make those service accommodations, or where maybe it just doesn't make sense, or maybe it's one of those microtransit solutions because the space is just not there. But that's the type of methodology we want to apply when we get those type of requests. So from that, again, this is an action item. Those are some of the main takeaways, the tier system, how we handle the stops, et cetera. I'm happy to take any questions.
Committee members, questions? Councilmember Scipio.
On the page that has the base, the amenity, the base, level 1, level 2, level 3, why would there not be an emergency call button where we have seating, level 1 and up? We just have it at level 3.
So the study done and the consultant that has done that, we had a conversation about that, and my understanding, Councilmember Scipio, is that their nationwide analysis of this, there wouldn't be enough demand for that type of service for that cost. I think it would warrant, if that's something that we want to pursue, that would just be an element that we would have to make that policy decision, do we want to include that? But the data was that essentially there was not enough demand for that type of service at every location, aside from the fact that there would be a major infrastructure improvement at every one of those, that maybe the ridership didn't support that.
And did they consider having any security cameras at these different stops at all for safety?
So good question, and that was an amenity that is not, you can see here, that was not considered at each one of these. I do know there's been increased interest in that, but for where we are today, that has not been considered for this rollout.
Councilmember Scipio, I would say with respect to the security cameras, we're having a lot of conversations about those, and whether it be recreation centers or community facilities or whatnot. Perhaps that's a conversation for that larger city process and policy about where those get located. Should these be included, and maybe that's the correct process for those.
Public safety. Councilmember Burke.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fansler. You've been busy today. So I had the same concerns that Councilmember Scipio raised about the emergency call button and just overall safety. And I did want to ask about the different tiers and some stops just having a pad only and not having the enclosed seated area. And I'm just thinking about rain and protecting our citizens. Why can't we have those everywhere?
Councilmember Burke, that's a great question. The challenge is, right, there's oftentimes two things. There's challenges, physical geometry or physical limitations within the street that where they're just not feasible to be constructed. So there's physical limitations often. Additionally, they're quite expensive, even though that doesn't seem that way. The type of glass, the type of structure, and often the special contracting requirements to certify those, they just become expensive. And so we want to have a structure where we deploy those where we would have the most benefit. So trying to do the most good for what we can with the dollars that we have. That's where we're at.
Well, and I hear you, and thank you for that response. I'm thinking about one in particular that is right across the street from Carver High School. It's just a bench. And I don't know what the ridership is at that location, but I know from working at the school that a lot of our kids rode that bus. We had activity on that corner all the time. And so I'm just wondering how we can, if it's possible right there, to change that from just a little seat to something a little more protective as far as the weather and safe.
So, and I'll be brief. One thing I wanted to mention, we had our consultant look at each stop and how many riders at each stop. And so less than 30% of our stops make up over 70% of our ridership. And so if there's ridership demand, and should City Council approve this, I think that would be a good process to look at where it qualifies, given that, if it has the ridership you're mentioning, we can apply this methodology because we have inventoried all the current stops and what the ridership is.
Councilmember Larson.
Level 1 seems to be the basic sort of bus stop aspiration that we have, and I was looking at that, thinking about lighting. Are we using solar lighting, or how are we lighting these units?
So for level 1, the first line of defense will be looking at our street lighting infrastructure, the existing street lighting infrastructure, where it's at, and then making recommendations from that to probably enhance that should it be needed if there's a gap or whatever. But we would first start by the existing infrastructure, upgrading that to LED where applicable, or then if there's a gap, finding a solution that fills that gap for public lighting on the street light.
So street lighting, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Councilmember, I'm sorry. Done?
I'm done.
Okay. Councilmember Mundy, any questions? Really?
One thing, and I think it'll take care of itself, but the other criteria is, we've got some stops where there's just so much litter and trash, and even if the ridership doesn't qualify that, I think just for aesthetics, we need to consider putting a trash bin there.
Thank you for that comment. Noted.
Okay.
You need a motion.
I want to ask a question first. Okay. Don't rush me. Okay. On the tiers, do we know, I don't need them now, but do we know the actual numbers on each one of those individual?
We have each stop classified by tier today.
Okay. If we could get those.
I'm happy to share that.
Okay, great. All right. Could I get a motion, please?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. If we could please vote on this.
I have a question, actually.
Before we vote, Mr. Larson has a question.
The installation of art at the bus stops, is that being monitored, or how is that being coordinated?
Yeah, so the Public Art Commission, Councilmember Larson, has been handling that. There was some money set aside. They put out requests for designs, and they award X number of those per year. So those generally come through the Public Art Commission.
How is that being maintained then now, Aaron?
I'm sorry.
How is that being maintained?
You mean as far as if the artwork is being damaged or vandalized?
Exactly, yes.
That's a good question. I don't know that I've heard from Kelly Bennett, who kind of heads that up, any specific examples of that, but I can check with him and see how that's being maintained.
It's a great program. I just hate for it to get diminished by.
Yeah, we've had some really great proposals through that.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay, are you ready to vote?
Yours is a no.
I'm sorry.
Yours didn't come up.
Mine did not come up, but I'm an aye. All right, that brings us to G5, please.
Item G5, resolution authorizing the implementation of a revised code of conduct and ban policy for the Clark Campbell Transportation Center, Hampton Hayes Administrative and Maintenance Facility, and public transportation vehicles.
Thank you. Ms. Woodson.
Good afternoon again, Councilmember
afternoon.
McIntosh and the Public Works Committee members. The item before you is an action item and is a resolution asking for approval of a revised and actually a combination of our current code of conduct that includes the admin facility located at 1060 North Trade Street, the transportation center located at 100 West 5th Street, as well as the maintenance yard and the vehicles that WISTA has. So what we have done, we've been talking for several meetings about different issues and concerns with the transportation center and the existing behaviors that have led to different types of costly items to repair due to misuse of our facilities. So the city manager and I and Jeff came up with a plan to create a staff or a strategic committee that would come and together on a regular basis and provide guidance to what we need to do, next steps to make this better, make our transportation center safer as well as our vehicles. So we decided that committee consisted of the assistant city manager, Aaron King, Jeff Fansler, Kelly, and we had legal, property facility maintenance, North State Security, and the WISTA staff. Transdev staff at WISTA. So we all came together collectively and met on several occasions to create a plan. So one of the things we quickly identified and noticed that we needed to do was revise our code of conduct to make sure that our citizens and our patrons were well aware of what's allowed and what's not allowed on our vehicles at the transportation center, et cetera. So we did that, and we proposed to this body, I believe, in an update that we were proposing to add some changes to the transportation center that would include metal detectors, so that would make it safer to make sure that no one enters the transit facility with weapons or anything of that nature. I will note that the metal detector has been procured and is scheduled to arrive in 2 weeks. Staff is prepared and has already scheduled training that will take place so that everyone is aware of how that procedure will take place and how the metal detectors need to be operated and managed. And that team will include property facility maintenance as well as North State Security, our current contractor for security services. So with that, we decided to consolidate our existing code of conduct with our ban policy and our appeals process as well. And what we did was, again, like Mr. Fansler said, we researched other peer cities and looked at their code of conduct, any policies that they had related to their transportation facility and things that were prohibited. And we took from there some takeaways that we did not have inclusive in our code of conduct and made some changes. So, I don't know if you have this up there. Okay, yes. So this is just the base, a list of some of the changes that we actually implemented in our code of conduct. And basically, what we did was,
Here it comes.
again,
We don't have it on our monitors yet. but-
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So we consolidated the code of conduct, the ban policy, and the appeals process to make sure that we have one document that provides all the information that the citizens would need and a go-to for them to acknowledge what is allowed, what's not allowed, and if they are affected by the ban policy, how they would actually request an appeal to be reinstated for their services that they had removed. So these are some of the things, not blocking the transportation center doors. I know that seems minor, but that's an issue that we consistently see on a regular basis. So citizens or staff that are trying to get into and access the facility can't do so because we have people that, for whatever reason are blocking, lying down, doing things that were not permissible in the transportation center. So we wanted to add that to the current code. Once the metal detectors are installed, and I think we are potentially planning on doing that sometime in November-ish timeframe, and everyone will be coming through one access. So they will come through that metal detectors that's on the side of the bay where the buses are, and all the other exterior doors will be card access only. So city employees, with Transdev employees, or the contract employees, they will actually have access per their badge to get in. Anyone will be able to get out because the doors will be push doors, so we'll have access to get out at any of the entrances or exits. Of course, no tampering with any of the company equipment, and that's including but not limited to the metal detectors, fire extinguisher, et cetera. We have, as far as loitering, we basically wanted to address this with different things, the behaviors that are identified in the actual code of conduct that are prohibited at the transportation center. No pets allowed. We have had an uptick in people bringing pets, everything from pit bulls to you name it, inside the transportation center, some on a leash, some not on a leash. So we know we needed to add that into our policy. Currently, as far as the vehicles are concerned, our transit riders, FTA and ADA, require us to have service animals only. Pets are optional, and that's by the agency. But when you start allowing pets to board the buses and pets to enter your facilities, you encounter a lot of issues. So we wanted to put that as a part of our policy as well. Basically everything else is kind of self-explanatory, and it also stems from the pets. And the last one is one of the most important ones, is the 90-minute rule. Currently, we have passengers or patrons, not necessarily passengers, that are at the transportation center for numerous of hours, and they're not performing any type of transit-related service. They're not catching a bus. We have several buses that come through, and they're not taking the bus. They're not asking for passes, purchases, appeal process, anything that's transit-related that happens in that transportation center. We have daily abuse of that. One of the things that we talked about early on, we know that a lot of that happens because some people just don't have anywhere to go. They have resources that are needed, and they may be not aware of that. So we, staff and the committee, we talked about ways that we can help. We're going to implement these things to minimize the unsafe behaviors and the illegal behaviors, but what are we going to do for them to help those that we know need help? So we quickly decided that we needed to gather resources throughout the city. And I partnered with Denise Price from Behavioral Services, as well as several others, and my team members, Takia Austin and Tina Carson. So we decided that we would start having a monthly resource fair. And we had the first resource fair on September the 6th at the Transportation Center. We basically located on the 5th Street side of the terminal. We had 10 vendors. So we had outreach that went out saying we need resources for our citizens. So we had 10 vendors that participated in that first event, and it ranged from Second Harvest Food Bank, we had Bear, we had the Winston-Salem Bike Patrol, we had several different vendors. We had a whole list of them, and everyone was engaged, and before we could even get set up, we had passengers, people coming, walking up, appreciating what they were offering. We had Posse that was located in the rear part. They were parked back in the back, and they provided services, and they had a lot of people that actually needed them. So we were happy, we were excited about it, and we look forward to our next event, and that took place on October the 4th. We had 16 vendors at that particular fair, and it was awesome. We had 16 tables out, different colors, balloons and everything, and we had so many people, and even some of my employees benefited from what the vendors were offering. So it was a very, very successful event, and we currently, at the day of, we had vendors coming up that actually were just walking around to see what all was being offered and wanted to know how they could become a part. So we have had to kind of put a list together, a limit, because now we have more than what we can actually provide outside in the on the 5th Street area. So that's a good problem to have. We welcome that. So we have gotten together and we have a team that have a list. So we have some vendors that are out there ongoing because we always have food insecurities, homelessness and things of that nature. So some will be there every month, and we decided to do this on a day that it was consistent so that people would be aware. So it's the first Wednesday of every month, and the time frame is from 1 to 4 p.m., and it's always at the front side of the transportation center right by the bus bays. So we're looking forward to, the staff is looking forward to the continuation of these events. But I said all that to say that that's what we've done first before we even implement anything as far as code of conduct, rules, policies, and procedures. We wanted to make sure that we provided this service up front first to eliminate where often these resources may be when we actually implement the metal detectors and this code of conduct, then we won't have people so many that are affected by it because we've provided a service for them on the front end, and then they're no longer a concern. So the resolution that I have before you this afternoon is just basically to ask for your approval to condense our code of conduct and make it inclusive. It has also the ban policy. It identifies what levels of bans that they would incur if they actually did not follow these rules. But then at the same time, if they feel like they have corrected their behaviors and they want to come back to use our services, it provides the appeal process as well. So it's all consolidated in one document, and we're asking for approval this afternoon. And I want to entertain any questions.
Questions from committee or council? Councilmember Burke.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Woodson, for this presentation, and thank you for thinking about individuals who may spend more than 90 minutes at the location and bringing these resources together. I have a couple of questions. How are you all going forward going to identify the individuals who have spent more than 90 minutes at the location?
So what happens on a daily? North State Security, or whoever the security company that is actually providing that service at the transportation center, they will monitor. They're responsible for walking around now, doing walkthrough inspections and just policing the inside of the transportation lobby as well as the bay and the outside, just to see what is happening at that time. So if they notice that a patron is there and the buses have all come through and left the terminal and they're still there, they will then approach them and ask them if they have a transportation need. If they are not able to produce a transfer or a bus ticket from either of the transportation providers that access the terminal, then they will be asked to leave. They just have to have a need, and that has to be proven with a bus ticket or transfer ticket.
Thank you. I just have one more question. Would it be possible to, in some small way, create a laminated list, front and back, of resources that could be handed out to these individuals? As you said, these are many individuals who might not have anywhere to go, and they might have various needs. Mm-hmm. And so just to be able to give out a laminated list of resources that they can contact.
Yes, and what we plan to do is actually put this on the website, the city's website, as well as the WISTA website, so that people can go there and find out what agencies and list of resources are available on that first Wednesday. But to your point, we do have that list. It's not laminated, but we will laminate it and have it as a handout, because what we used it for on October the 4th was just to have all of the staff had it so they can say, well, you need your blood pressure checked. You can go right over there and they'll check your blood pressure and that. So we had it as a point of reference, but we will definitely take that in consideration and
Good idea.
provide that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Larson, anything?
Well, my compliments on really going down the rabbit hole and thinking about every possible problem that you might be having at the bus station and on the ridership itself. And I really compliment you for that. The enforcement, you've answered some of that. You have a contract service of people in there. How do they interface with our city police department?
The contractor currently is the North State Security, and they actually have North State Security for the city of Winston-Salem as well. And they actually work with WSPD, mostly the bike patrol, but we have communications with them. If there's any type of activity that's beyond their jurisdiction, then they immediately call WSPD and they'll respond.
Are they armed, North State?
Some of them.
Are they armed? They are armed.
Yes. We have unarmed and armed, we have armed security at the transportation
So
center.
the list of violations and the recourse for actions is comprehensive and applaudable, but how does the public know of all the things that they're supposed to be doing to behave at this particular location? Is that?
It's posted as inside of the transportation center. If approved, we will revise that and have it in a larger format that's readable, that's actually laminated in the, and posted on the wall. It'll be on the WISTA website, and I'm sure that DOT will have it on the city website as well.
It's a lot of copy, but I really applaud what you've done here, and it hopefully will help the situation. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mundy?
I think a lot of the work you've done is great. I think you've gone above and beyond putting together the resource fair. But there are some concerns that have come to me from some of my citizens. I don't know if you realize that the Tri-City Beat ran a story on these potential changes, and it listed the wording, and I don't see that wording here, but some of the concerns that have come to me is that they feel that the wording like boisterous, lewd, lascivious, profane language or behavior, public impairment, unsanitary issues, fighting, that these are words that could be used. And somebody else said we could weaponize these words against a marginal population. And they are suggesting, I did go to someone who works with this population, they're suggesting objective and concise code language that would include, one, loitering as defined by, and give examples of, and give non-examples of. So I think that the recommendation here is to soften the language. I don't want to stop your progress because I know how badly it's needed, but I did want to bring this to light, that we may want to look at that wording and make sure that it's not unduly harsh, not the actions, but the words. But then the other question I couldn't answer, and this is, I've said all along, we need more funding to go towards the homeless. When someone asked me how I could vote to pay millions of dollars so that the visiting team at the Dash would have a really nice locker room, but we're taking away the only bathrooms that homeless people have. So we need a plan to put bathrooms downtown. That's not your responsibility. That is collectively our responsibility. But I just think it's unethical to take away the only, not lodging, but the only protection that these folks have from cold weather, from really hot weather, using the bathroom. The resource fair is wonderful, please continue that, but we need something day to day, not only for them, but for the citizens and business people who are bothered by their presence and actions. It would work to solve two problems at the same time.
Right. And I appreciate that. A couple things. One, on the choice of words. Takesha Red, Assistant City Attorney, and I, we went over words and the definition of them, what words to use to make sure. And one of the things that she brought to my attention and we agreed on is to make sure that the words actually are used so that people will understand what is prohibited and what's not. Because sometimes if you have a broad word, people don't quite understand what you mean by that. So that was the intent of putting specifics in that paragraph of the code of conduct. As far as the bathroom, the restrooms, of course, the restrooms at the transportation center are open to the public. Even the 90-minute rule wouldn't apply to them. If someone is walking downtown and need to use the restroom, they come through the metal detectors when they're installed, or currently just come in as we are now and use the restroom. So it's not that those restrooms will not be available. However, when you have restrooms and they're not used properly, then they cause more of a financial impact on the city when you have to go through and go underground and unclog, drains and all that. So that's something that.
I agree, yes.
Yeah, is taken into consideration. But we are not proposing to lock the bathrooms down at any rate. People will be able to use them as they need to.
I'm going to forward this to you just so you got, some of the concerns. You may want to adjust some of the wording. I understand how important it is, but it's also my responsibility to bring to light some of these concerns that my constituents shared with me.
Most definitely. Thank you.
Councilmember Scipio.
Just another little thought. The code of conduct, I'm assuming, is going to also be posted on each of our buses. So when people get on the bus, they understand what the code of conduct is for
Yes.
riding our bus and going to our transit station.
Yes, we will make sure that happens.
Thank you. Oh, you want a motion? Oh, Ms. Burke.
I got a comment, but go ahead, Councilmember Burke.
Thank you. As far as the code of conduct being posted inside the facility, on the outside where the patrons sit and wait for the buses, will it be posted out there as well?
We had not discussed that, but we will look at a location that makes sense to put it outside so that it can be exterior as well as interior.
Okay.
We'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
First, I want to commend Ms. Woodson on another excellent report. I know she works hard on this. I know the whole group put a lot of effort into it, and it's very well put together, so thank you. The resource fair is brilliant. I love that idea. And look, I'm not surprised that it's really well attended.
Yes.
A big bonus to people. I do want to say that, and this was brought to my attention a while back by staff, but we've allowed bad conduct to occur at the transit center that we would never tolerate at this building.
That's true.
Or City Hall South, or Lowry Street. So this is one of our facilities where there are employees who have to deal with bad behavior every day, and that's what we're talking about is bad behavior. How do we diminish or eliminate bad behavior? So this is a long time coming. I wish we had, as a council, picked this up earlier, but I really do appreciate you all bringing this to our attention, and I do feel like it's our duty to make the transit centers safe for employees as City Hall is. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, if I could get a motion.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. My button's working now. That is unanimous. All right. G6, do we have time? How lengthy is G6?
Yeah, we got 15 minutes.
You want to run it? Got 15 minutes?
Item G6, update on Winston-Salem Department of Transportation capital projects.
Mr. Fansler, again, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. Just wanted to highlight some of the capital projects. I know some of the public works departments have been trying to update more frequently on some of these capital investments that the city's making and where staff is, trying to navigate this market that we're in with labor, et cetera. Let's just go through some of these projects. They're just in summary of what the project title is. So the Strollway project, phase 1 is complete. If you recall, that was a resurfacing. We did some street lighting infrastructure. This was a 2018 bond project. We had a balance of about $400,000 left with that after we've completed the base scope. We did bring an item back to this committee of basically adding on that, which did require us to go back out to professionally design additional amenities for additional sidewalk improvements, some additional improvements around our pedestrian signals, et cetera. And we expect for that, it is designed, and we'll go out for construction later this fall with that project. Next, Polo Road improvement projects, another 2018 bond-funded capital project where we have the designs complete. We have done all the property acquisitions. It was 22 or so properties that we had to acquire. Spent some time in that. But we have done all that work, and we are actively wrapping up those construction and bid documents to work with our purchasing department to send this one out to bid. So we plan to do that with a construction window starting sometime early 2024 if we can successfully get a bidder this fall and winter with the Polo Road Improvement Project. That is largely just pedestrian accommodations with that project. First and Second Street two-way conversion project. Finally, that project is complete. We tore up a lot of stuff right in front of this building. That is complete. There's a couple little nuances that we're addressing to clean up some of the punch list items, but that project is largely complete. We're looking to close the books on that here very soon as we wrap up the punch list. Switching gears to Liberty Main, that project is currently going on, but it has a lot of different life cycles in this project because you don't actually see a paver out there on Liberty Main Street today. But what has been happening is we have been relocating utilities around the Brookstown area. That work has been done. We have also been working with Duke Energy to procure the metal traffic signal poles. There is a tremendous lead time on that equipment, and Duke is the owner of those assets. So that is a whole level of work that has to be coordinated with them and their engineering team to facilitate the procurement of those metal traffic signal poles, which have been purchased. So we're in a holding pattern while we get those in, and Duke just starts to install those. And then we will be issuing the big construction where you'll see the actual roadway work start sometime in spring of 2024. That's our current schedule on that one. Next, the Business 40 corridor enhancements. So this is a supplement to the major project that was done in partnership with NCDOT. This one enhances that with a lot of landscaping betterments. The big piece here is the street lighting for the bridges. That is the largest piece of that project. Again, there's a long lead time on those. Just like the Liberty Main project, we have procured the lights for all those bridges. We have placed that order, and we're working to get those moving. So that's where we're in that procurement stage for those street lights. And once we get a better timeline of when those can be delivered, we will be looking to award the actual construction where we're installing those lights and doing the landscaping betterments in early 2024 as well. Let's talk multi-use path. So two sections. The eastern section, both of these are federally funded in 2018 bond local match funds to fund this project. The eastern section, essentially from the Strollway where it is today, headed over westwardly towards 4th Street. That is the eastern section. There's a long history with this project, ups and downs with partnerships with NCDOT that ultimately transitioned back to the city to manage this project. Long story short, that project will go out this fall. It is in the final stage of NCDOT authorization, so they have everything they need. They are finally reviewing all the bid documents, all the estimates, all the line item proposals, all the front end package, and we expect NCDOT to approve that project in the next 30 days or so. Then we'll be going out with our purchasing department to let that project. The western piece, basically from 4th Street out to Laughlin there at Baptist Hospital, Atrium, Wake Forest Baptist, that piece is under designed. That is a small, about 3/10 of a mile, but very, very complicated. 2 bridges, some other major utility impacts and public infrastructure impacts as we ride adjacent to the parkway. So this is a long design window on that project because there's a lot of moving parts. And that one, we're going to prioritize building the eastern section, and then once we get that done, our construction timeline is the 2025 to where we're building that project. But again, we'll be in design phase for the next several months trying to design these bridges, et cetera, for that western section. The Long Branch Trail. You are likely aware of the successful award of the raised grant application to fund the Long Branch Trail extension, basically from MLK North up to 25th Street. We've executed that agreement, and we're working to begin design in early part of 2024 for that work. Again, some significant design challenges along that existing corridor with some really pinch points there that we'll have to design around and facilitate. But that design contract, we're earmarking that January 2024 timeframe. So the Signal Improvement Project, this was a capital improvement project that was in last year's budget, where we have actually partnered with the fire department for this one. This is coming out of the fire department's general fund balance for what we're calling a signal queue cutter. This is one of the first one. It is the first one in the city of Winston-Salem. It is on our tier system for projects that our staff has been managing and partnering with the fire department. But essentially, that project will allow for the fire apparatuses to exit that Fire Station 10 much more efficiently by providing a much-needed gap in traffic in all directions to allow that egress for the fire apparatus. That project has been fully designed. Again, since that is an NCDOT traffic signal, they have to sign off on it. So therein lies that final stamp of approval, final sealed plans, everything is in their queue. We're just waiting on the go-ahead. We'll again put that project out as soon as we have that NCDOT authorization for construction. Priority pedestrian project, you have seen this many times. We've done 33 projects. I just want to highlight we're currently working at Indiana and Deschler Street for some of those pedestrian improvements that are going on there now. That project's actively underway. This is funded by our 2019 limited obligation bonds. We have done tremendous amount of improvements there. And we've tried to make these based on pedestrian demand and then spread those around as ward specific as we could get and then maximize our dollars. So 33 projects done, and we're wrapping up the Indiana project probably next week as we finish up the work out there. So really good work going on with those priority pedestrian improvements, the little spot intersection improvement projects. That's all I got.
All right, Mr. Fanzer, thanks for your rapid-fire delivery. We got that all in under the wire. We got questions for Mr. Fanzler. If there's anything in detail, maybe we can get to him after the meeting. But if there's nothing else, I would like to just ask Assistant City Manager King if either in our November or December meeting, if we could get an update on the contractors who are currently tearing up our streets, installing our fiber network, if we could get some feedback on that. I'd like to have legal weigh in on that, what we can and can't require of them and the sort of ongoing nightmare we're facing there.
That'll be on for your November agenda. Charles Hendrick in Engineering is already kind of pulling together some information, and we've been in close contact with those folks as well, so you'll see that in November.
Great, and we've talked about this before, but if we can get an item on handicap and valet rules for downtown. Again, we're dealing with a situation where the success of what's going on downtown is causing some pinch points, and so if we can just go over those. So that's all that I have, although I would like to thank Kelly from DOT for all her hard work. I see her out in the audience. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, we are adjourned.